What the Republicans in the House of Representatives recently passed a bill protecting women in sports from transgender and biological males. Now, my granddaughters are fairly young, but they are showing tremendous athletic ability, naturally taking after their grandfather. And I would like to know, and so would the mothers of my grandchildren and my sons would like to know, if you see anybody in the Senate on the other side crossing the aisle and voting to protect real women in sports.
You know, I never thought in my lifetime we would see our daughters have to compete against biological males. I never thought that we'd see where those biological males were expecting to shower in the girls' locker rooms with our daughters. I never thought I'd see a judge order that happen. I never thought I'd see school administrators want to administer gender-blocking drugs to our children without parental knowledge. All these things are happening. It's unbelievable. But no, there will be no Democrats in the United States Senate that will sign on to that. I'm fairly confident, maybe one or two, but not enough to pass the bill. I hope that we have champions in the Wisconsin legislature that'll pass that piece of legislation. Now, will Tony Evers sign it? Probably not. But we ought to pass these protections for our women and for our daughters. I think it's vital. Where are the feminists? Standing up for women's sports, for women's rights. But listen, we're a compassionate society. People with gender dysphoria, we have compassion for. Okay? We don't want to see anybody discriminate against them, but allowing biological males to compete against our daughters we're not allowing, would not be discrimination. That's just called common sense. Okay?
Okay, one more question. Who's got a question?
I was raised Republican, hardcore. Like I grew up, I introduced my family to Rush Limbaugh. 47, I was listening to it when I was a teenager and introduced it to my grandma and the other people. That's where I started, and I'm not there anymore. And when I hear you talk about the left, and you talk about them in language that assumes that we should trust you and your judgment. The people on the left, they're a bunch of crazy radical people that want to do all these horrible things. I'm just curious, like, how is that? We're supposed to distrust them, but we're supposed to trust you. We're supposed to dislike, and people like me are the problem often when you talk, but how do you and I work this out? Because I'm from Wisconsin, right? I live in Milwaukee, and you're my senator, and whenever you open your mouth about the things that I care about, it's always pejorative and dismissive and aggressive. And so I'm just curious, like, what is the path you see for you and I to ever agree on anything?
Okay, now that's your justification of it. I wouldn't agree with how you typify the way I address issues. Again, I just laid out my belief in terms of what's happening with transgenderism and biological males competing in women's sports. Again, I'm just telling you, I think it's crazy that we're allowing that. Again, there's nothing, I'm not demagogic in that way. I'm not bombastic. I don't know if any of you watched Bobby Kennedy's announcement speech, almost 2 hours long. I watched the whole thing. I've actually developed a pretty good relationship with Bobby Kennedy. I'll give you a couple other, I talked about the Creature from Jekyll Island. Here's 2 books of Bobby Kennedy recommend that I read, and I did read them. JFK and the Unspeakable, and The Devil's Chessboard. I recommend everybody read those. They'll be somewhat eye-opening. But I thought it was interesting in Bobby Kennedy's speech is an awful lot of echoes of what I've always said. So let's focus on areas of agreement. I come from the private sector. You don't accomplish anything in the private sector arguing with everybody. So there's plenty of things that divide us, but let's focus on areas of agreement, which is what I did as chairman of the committee. It's how I passed over 300 pieces of legislation, pretty much nonpartisan. 130 of those got signed into law. So I'm all for finding areas of agreement. The other thing that I appreciate about Bobby Kennedy's speech is he made a commitment to telling the truth, conveying the truth. Okay, now, I don't think truth is relative, but there's certainly different perceptions about what is truth. But what I've done as your U.S. Senator, I guarantee this. I made 2 promises when I first ran in 2010. I'll never vote my re-election in mind, and I honored that promise. And the other thing I promised, I'll always tell you the truth. And I've scrupulously honored that promise as well. Now, we might disagree, and I'm very respectful of people that disagree with me. But actions are being taken, by government, by officials, that are literally destroying this country. The deaths. I mean, all the divisiveness. I mean, think. I didn't call you. Listen, yeah, you do have to use some shorthand in this business. Talk about radical leftists. So I'm not talking about every Democrat.
But you're talking about me.
Well, if you're a radical leftist and you got some of these crazy views, I guess I'd call you radical leftist. But I'm not calling you that.
Why are they crazy?
Well, again, having biological males compete with our daughters, I think that's kind of crazy. Okay. I think $32 trillion worth of debt with no end sight. I think it's kind of crazy. I think open borders and the flooded deadly drugs and the sex trafficking. I think that's crazy. I think it's horrible. It's harmful, and we're ignoring on those things. But anyway, getting back to my point, there are elements in our country that are driving division. I think the vast majority of Americans embrace Martin Luther King's vision of this country, that we evaluate people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I'm 68 years old. I've seen a dramatic reduction in discrimination of all forms during my lifetime. Does discrimination exist? Sure, it always will. But we've actually made some pretty strong improvements. Why not celebrate that success as opposed to what is happening, and this is critical race theory, exacerbating the divides. Driving greater division. Okay? That's what I'm opposed to. And I'm sorry, I think that's not only crazy, it's destructive. And I think this nation is something so rare and so precious. And I think Americans are good people across the board. I think we are good people. I've said this repeatedly. We share the same goal. We all want a safe, prosperous, secure America. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we need to focus on those areas of agreement. But again, you get in the political realm, you got issues, there's divisions. You acknowledge that. You fight for what you think is right. Okay? You can't just lay over and let this country be destroyed. Okay? Thank you all.